Welcome to video 5, geometric sequences. The previous video, video 4, we learned about arithmetic sequences. And the thing with arithmetic sequences is you got from one term to the next by having some sort of common difference. Like you added 5 to get to the next term, then added 5 to get to the term after that, added 5 to get to the term after that. Or it could have been minus 5, minus 5, minus 5. It's basically add or subtract by some constant number, which we call d, to get from one term to the next. In a geometric sequence, instead of adding and subtracting to get to the next term, we're going to be multiplying and dividing. And instead of having a common ratio from one term to the next, we're going to have, see, messed it up there. Instead of having a common difference, we're going to have a common ratio. So instead of saying, what is D, we're going to be asking what is R for common ratio. And so looking at this first sequence here, 2, 6, 18, 54, how do I go from one to the next? And maybe you could just kind of tell that we are multiplying by 3 to get there. 2 times 3 is 6, and 6 times 3 is 18, and 18 times 3 is 54. And since we're going to be multiplying and dividing, the numbers get large fast, we're definitely going to want to have our calculator handy. So let me get mine out and ready to go. But if you can't just tell, much like with the arithmetic, what we did was you could subtract any two, subtract any term and the previous term, and that got you the common difference d. Well, to get the common ratio for geometric sequences, you divide any term by the previous term. And so these are two consecutive terms, 16 and 18. If I do 18 divided by the term before, it's 6. 18 divided by 6 gives me 3. And so in this case, my R value, my common ratio of how I get from one term to the next term is 3. So a little practice on that. Find the common ratio, and then once we have that, let's find the next 3 terms. Again, our calculator will be very useful for this once we know it. So how do I get my common ratio? Well, if I'm not sure, I'm going to take any term, like my second term, and divide it by my first term. 6 divided by negative 3 is negative 2. And so this is R. R equals negative 2. So my next terms, my next 3 terms, I times negative 2 to get from 3 to 6, times negative 2 is negative 12, times negative 2 is 24, times negative 2 would be negative 48. Again, if you have your calculator handy, it's useful for all this. Like this next one, negative 48 times negative 2. The sign there is very important, and so we have a 96. I'm not going to be able to do that. So a positive 96. And then you may be able to guess that this one's going to be negative. When R is negative, when we're multiplying by a negative number, what's going to happen is every other term is going to be changing signs. We go negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative. And so 96 times, oops, I got to change back over to that. Sorry about that. Get rid of that. Times negative 2 is negative 192. Get my pen back, negative 192. All right, this next one. What is my common ratio? Well, if I take my second term and divide my first term, 180 divided by 80 divided by 160. And maybe you do that in your head, maybe you can't. Well, you could type it in here. 80 divided by 160 is a decimal. And most of you know I don't like decimals. Well, not that I don't like decimals. I prefer fractions. They're more exact. And so this equals 1/2. And so our ratio here equals 1/2. Now, this can be kind of thought of, instead of multiplying, it can be thought of as division. To go from 160 to 80, there's 2 ways I can think about that. I could think about that as dividing by 2, or I could think about it as multiplying by 1/2. Just like with the arithmetic, when my difference was negative, I could say I'm minusing 5, or I could say I'm adding negative 5. It's the same thing. So dividing by 2 or multiplying by 1/2, either way. And so my next 3 terms, 20 times 1/2 or divided by 2 is 10, divided by 2 is 5, and then 5 divided by 2, I'm actually going to write as 5/2. It could be a decimal answer, unless the problem might actually specify in these, as happens, and we'll see this in a moment, what are the fraction answers, so we have to look out for that. This formula here is how we find the nth term, like the 50th term, the 60th term kind of thing. And we saw a similar formula for the arithmetic. For arithmetic, it was a to the n is a1 plus n minus 1 times d. This was your arithmetic formula. This is our geometric one. And so we need to know both because they're different types of sequences. They're going to have different types of formulas. Now what this is, it still has a1 just like this does. But instead of a d, remember it has an r. And there's nothing between a1 and r here, so that's going to be multiplied. So a1 times r, and r is raised to an exponent of n minus 1. And notice we also have an n minus 1 here. And so remember what n minus 1 is. If we want the 50th term, n is 50. So we would do 50 minus 1 to get 49. And so let's try this formula out on a couple of problems. Find the 5th and 15th term of these sequences. Well, let's do the 5th. So a5. The way that works is you have a1. Let me write my formula up here, actually. an equals a1 times r raised to the n minus 1. So a1 would be 2. Remember, that's your first term. A1 stands for first term. And then do parentheses r. So we have to figure out what r is. How do I go from 2 to 8? Well, I multiply it by 4. And I could do 8 divided by 2 to get that. And then I could always confirm that by doing 8 times 4 is 32 to make sure that that is indeed my r. Raised to the n minus 1, here's my n value for the 5th term. So 5 minus 1. And so that's 2 times 4 raised to the 4th. 2 times, well, what's 4 to the 4th? Well, if you're not sure, what do? You type it in. 4 raised to the 4th power is 256. 256, and then finally I'm going to multiply that by 2. Times 2. 256 times 2. 256 times 2 is 512. Oh boy. Hold on, I'm going to pause the video. Okay, sorry about that. I had to pause the video for a moment. Now you probably didn't notice because I paused the video and unpaused it. So to you, it only took a second, but that was actually a couple-minute break. Miss Walsh had to make an announcement there. So, all right, let's get back on track. So 2 times 256 is 512. All right, so that's our 5th term. Now, couldn't we just continue the pattern and get the 5th term? Yes, we could, but sometimes we need to see the work for this formula, and sometimes if we want something like the 50th term, it's just going to be too hard. So the formula is important for a couple of reasons. But let's try the 15th term. So a15 equals your first term times r raised to the 14th. That's going to be your, remember, your n minus 1 would be 15 minus 1 for the 15th term. So that's 2 times 4 to the 14th. Let's see if this number might even be too big for my calculator. Let's see. 4 to the 14th. Oh, that's a large number. And then I'm going to multiply that by 2. And it's going to be another very large number. And so we're going to see these sometimes in this chapter for this reason. Let's see. That's a 2, 6, 8, 4, 3, 5, 4, 5, 6. And then the final answer is 5, 3, 6, 8, 7, 0, 9, 1, 2. Yikes. Big number. So 53 million. All right. So yeah, calculator is helpful there. All right, let's try another one. Find the 5th term. All right, so A5 is what we're looking for here. So A5. Our first term, A1, is -5. My R in this case is -3, and I could just see -5 times -3 is 15. But if you're not sure, just do a little quick math. 15 divided by -5, your second term divided by your first term is going to tell you that -3. So -3 raised to the 4th. Because I want the 5th term, so 1 less than that would be 4. So this is going to be -5 times, well, what's -3 to the 4th? Well, remember, because it's being raised to an even exponent, it's going to turn positive. So it's going to be positive. Let's see, 3 cubed is 27. I believe that's 81. I can confirm that on here. I've got to use parentheses, -3, parentheses, raised to the 4th power. Yep, and times -5 is -405. So -405 is my answer here. Okay, we got one more? Yeah, let's do one more. The 7th term. This one's going to involve fractions here. So a to this A7, our 7th term, is our first term 2 times r, and it's going to be raised to the 6th. 7 minus 1, remember, n minus 1. R I have to figure out. So what is r? How do I go from 2 to 1? Well, I could always take my second term and divide by my first term, and there's really not much to do here. It's times a half. My r is 1/2. 2 times 1/2 is 1. 1 times a half is a half. A half times a half is a fourth, right? Think about it. Times 1/2. You multiply the top. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. Yeah, so r is 1/2. And so 2 times a half to the 6th. Now, I could do that in pieces. I could do 1 to the 6th over 2 to the 6th, or I could try to type it into my calculator, which I think a lot of you tend to do. So let me show that. So 1/2 raised to the 6th. Fraction answers is 1/64th. So 1 over 64. Oops, let me get that in there. 1 over 64. And we're doing 2 times that. That's like 2 over 1, so that's 2 over 64. Simplifies down to 1 over 32. That's my final answer. All right.